Alright, so I'm going to be drawing different shapes of trees today. We're going to start with a round tree. There. Alright. So I want you to pay attention to kind of the basic procedure I use. Try to replicate that as much as you can. We don't need to duplicate what's on the sheet exactly. We're just trying to get the essence of it. So it doesn't have to be perfect. We don't have to pay attention to every single curve and nook and cranny like if we were drawing a portrait of somebody. We just want to have the essence of the trees we're drawing. So we're going to start with this round shape. So I'm going to start by kind of sketching in the trunk. And rather than worrying about necessarily getting an outline of it, I'm just going to try to map its path. And again, I don't need to make the trunk exactly like the one in the reference image. I just want to kind of get the essence of it. So maybe it goes kind of like this. Alright, and now I want to get the shape of the foliage. So this is called a round tree on the sheet, but it's not actually all that round. It really looks like kind of an upside down heart shape to me, almost. It kind of comes out like this and goes up. And the top is a little bit more rounded. It's not pointy at the bottom, but sort of an upside down heart shape. Alright, so I've got like the basic shape I want for the foliage, and the basic shape I want for the trunk. Now I'm going to go back in and I'm going to make contour lines, but instead of doing like a straight contour line, I'm going to think about the texture of the leaves. So I'm going to make my contour line a little more scraggly. And you don't necessarily need to completely enclose the whole thing, so you can kind of skip some sections and have kind of lost and found contour lines, and you can add little clumps off to the side, kind of outlier clumps and stuff like that, whatever you want to do. Kind of playing around in those details is going to be one of the things that makes your drawing interesting and unique. So now I'm going to kind of sketch in my contour lines for the trunk. Again, I can kind of think about making kind of contour lines that have kind of a bark texture feel to them, but this is actually so small that I might not really be able to worry too much about that detail. So now I've got my contour lines on here. A little more. Now I want to shade it. So I'm really mostly worried about shading the block of foliage up here, and a little less about the trunk, again, because it's so small. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of shade the entirety of the tree a light gray to start. If I was using a color, I might be using like a light green to start. And then I'm going to go in and add some darker areas. I'm using a wooden pencil, so I'm using the side of my pencil for this. If you have a mechanical pencil, that's okay too. Just have to make more strokes. But by adding a little bit of shadow to the form, I make it feel a little more three-dimensional. And if you feel like it, you can actually pull out some highlights too with an eraser. I'll add a little more dimension to it still. You could go in, add a little bit of texture, some scraggly lines in here every once in a while. Something like that. So that's the basic idea. So if you want to just work from your sheet now, you can, or if you want to follow along with me, that's fine too. So our next tree is called Spreading. So it's a similar shape, and a lot of these will be similar shapes. It's just a little bit wider. I'm going to kind of move to the middle of my paper and start there, because I've got 3 trees on the top row, so I'm going to try to space them out. This trunk's a little bit wider as well as the foliage, so I'm going to make it a little bit wider. Again, mostly not really worried about getting the contours of the trunk right now. More concerned about getting the path of the trunk. So I'm not worried about the outline too much as I am about the kind of center lines of everything. Alright, so I've got my trunk here. It's nice and thick. I've got a couple of branches up here as well. Now I can add my foliage block. So this one on the reference sheet does a cool thing of having some kind of separated leaf blocks out here, like right here. And it's just implying that the branches are so thin that we aren't necessarily going to draw them. I think that's a cool way of handling this. Again, let's actually just worry about the general shape to start and not get too specific. It kind of spreads out like this. After I sketch in the shape I want, or the space I want everything to take up, I can go back in and start getting some contour lines. Again, I'm going to do kind of a scraggly feel to simulate the leaves up here. This one also has like a lot of areas where it kind of comes in dramatically. Kind of reminds me of like a coastline on a map. You can also make it do the same thing in opposite, make it kind of come out more. And that's a really good way to kind of add interest. I think the details that you choose to pay attention to and what you do with them is like a big part of your personal style. So kind of think about playing around and exploring the things you enjoy exploring and putting detail into. That kind of develops you and it gives you a unique kind of identity as an artist. So again, after I get my contour lines in, let's get that trunk a little bit. Now I'm kind of more concerned with outlines and edges this time around. Alright, after I get that, I'm going to go ahead and shade in my foliage block here. And then add some shadow to make it look a little more three-dimensional. And you can pretty much shade wherever you want. Generally, you're going to have more on the underside probably because you are outside, so the light's going to be coming from above most of the time. But it'll be more realistic if you kind of think about the 3D forms of the leaf bunches here and how they are shaped and where that shadow would be. But I think there's lots of room to explore and experiment. Maybe a little shadow under the tree here this time. Alright, so that's that one's called a spreading shape. Spreading. Alright, next one is pyramidal. So despite being called pyramidal, I feel like this one is shaped kind of like a cone. But there's also another one later that's called conical, so I get it. But our general shape seems to me to be kind of a cone shape like this. So I'm actually going to do this one a little bit differently. I'm going to start by sketching out the very rough shape here. I'm going to shade that. I might use like kind of a contour shading. So these two trees I think are like deciduous trees with leaves. And these ones are like evergreen trees. I think the evergreen trees tend to have a darker value to them. So you might shade a little bit darker with your initial shading on this one. Especially if you're drawing it with some other trees to give some variation from the leafy trees to the kind of needly trees, conifers. I hope I got my tree terminology right. It's been a while. Alright, here's the ground. And now time to do the contour line. For this one, instead of doing the contour line like this where I have been, what I'm going to do is just kind of focus on texture. So I do want to define the outline of the tree. But I'm going to do it by kind of just adding lines that kind of come out like this. So it's kind of scraggly lines. And what I'm showing is kind of the shadow on the other underside of the branches. So again, I'm not really even going to close it up. I'm just going to kind of add some scraggly lines coming out. I want some of them to stick out like past outside the boundary of the tree a little bit. Maybe some coming up like this. And a good way to think about it is imagine that I'm just drawing the shadows that are underneath some of the branches here. They're going to be long. They're going to be kind of scraggly and broken up. Not scraggly like this, scraggly like this. This is more of a maybe zigzaggy line to me, a little bit sharper. And so these branches are going to come out kind of in a radial direction, if we think about this as being a circle. So we kind of want to kind of think about what direction they're coming out. So if it's like here, it's going to be coming out kind of this direction. This one's going to go like this, but it's going to go more towards us, so it'll be shorter. So luckily, when we're drawing trees, not all of these things need to be coming out at a perfect angle. It's probably not really natural. So if we're a little bit off, we're okay, but we kind of generally want them to come out in radial direction from the trunk.
So how many trees do we have to draw?
10. All right. Pyramidal. All right, so the next shape is oval shape. This one has a little bit of a wider base at the ground here. Coming up like this. All right, so this one's similar to the round shape up here. It's just taller, right? It's the same idea. I don't really need to get into too much detail. I can just draw the general shape first. Something like that. Then I can get in, do my contour line. Again, getting all scraggly. You might think about varying the way you do this. You might make some of these a little sharper, maybe some of these a little rounder. It's kind of good practice for using different textures on different types of trees, getting a little variation in there. Maybe I'll do my next one with rounder leaves. So these all look kind of the same. So again, we get that blocked in. You can add contour lines to the trunk if you want. You can shade the trunk a little bit if you want. All up to you, and depends on the type of the tree. So we're not really looking at species of trees today, we're looking at different shapes, but different species will have different bark, different leaves, different kind of ways they interact with the light. We're not going to get too deep into that, just kind of different tree shapes for you to start. Shade the whole thing again, and then add some shadow shapes. All right. What's that one? Oval. Next one is conical. Like I said, I told you earlier, there's a conical shape. This one is a little bit skinnier than the pyramid shape we had earlier. A little rounder at the bottom too, maybe. But same idea other than that. This one looks more like an evergreen type tree, so I'm going to go a little darker with my shading. This one also has less kind of stuff poking out of it. I'm actually going to go a little bit more kind of a fuzzy texture here, kind of spiky. Again, I want that same sort of idea. Kind of that radial pattern sticking out from there. All right. This one called vase. I'm gonna try to do like a rounder leafy shape here when I add my contours. I kind of got trunk like this. And then this vase shape seems like it's a little more angular here and here. And then kind of rounder on top. I think that's what the vase shape is referring to. For this one, I'm going to make my contour lines a little more round. Maybe almost like a curly Q shape. Little curly Qs. Just varying the texture a little bit. Again, you can kind of play with this and experiment and do your own thing. The things you pay attention to are going to be part of your art style. Alright. Shade this in. Might add some contours for the trunk there as well. And this procedure is the same no matter what materials I'm using. Maybe with a few variations, but similar ideas. I could do the same kind of procedure with watercolors, where I'd maybe sketch it out with a pencil first, and then use watercolors. So here I'd be using a light green to start. And then after that dried, I might go over again, or maybe even while it's still wet, if I wanted a little bit of bleeding, I go over it again with a darker green, and then come in and maybe add to it and do some line work with a pen. Next one is columnar. So we've got a little trunk on this one. And then it kind of comes up. More straight sides here and here until it gets to the top. Maybe we go in and out a little bit, make it interesting. Again, it depends, you know. If you're drawing trees in an affluent neighborhood, they might all be perfectly manicured and groomed and shaped. But if you're drawing trees in a forest, it's probably not going to be the situation, right? It might be a little wilder. Just kind of depending on what mood you want to set, or what kind of scene you're depicting. Alright, 3 more. So next one is called open. So basically we've got 3 different clumps of foliage here. Kind of one down here, one up here, and they're kind of wild, and one up here. Then we've maybe got some branches running through. contour lines. Maybe some clumps coming off. Maybe when you're drawing your trunks here, maybe you only draw contour lines on the undersides. That is your shading. You can do it that way if you want. You don't have to draw the outline of every single thing in your drawing. It's not always the best way to do it. I want some more clumps up here coming off. If that bugs you too much, you can add a little line in there connecting them. That's fine. Shade all the way through. And then add some shadow. Some of the bottom areas. And it's open. I was trying to write spreading again. Should be a good name for this one too. Next one is weeping. It's kind of a willow tree shape. Got kind of a base here. Here's the trunk. Then we got kind of, this one's a little bit different. You've got kind of these ridges. Go like this. So you almost have, if we're drawing it in the same way, we almost have a block here. Kind of like this. Then another block on top. It goes more like this. And then another block up at the very top maybe. And then these are kind of, these top edges are a little bit darker. You've got more branches flowing through them. Then they kind of drop down like this. So we have less contour lines and more like internal contours, I guess you'd call them, kind of defining these branches. Maybe make kind of a shaggy edge here. Alright, we'll get one more real quick. It's our irregular shape. This is a lot like the open shape. There's just not the gaps in between the clumps, but you can do any sort of kind of irregular outline to this, doesn't really matter. Probably could have started without sketching it and just gone in for my contour lines, but that's alright. Alright, shade the whole thing, and then go back and add the shadows. Irregular. Alright, and that is it. Then we're done.